How many buildings in the world have been a hospital, home to parliament, an Olympic venue, and an exhibition hall all in one lifetime? What if I told you that same building and the surrounding landscape is a UNESCO World Heritage Site? Today, I'm exploring the storied history of Melbourne's Royal Exhibition Building and the surrounding Carlton Gardens. If you're new here, hello. I'm Ken and I make videos about history, infrastructure, architecture, and the environment. Thanks for joining me. In today's video, I'm diving into how the Royal Exhibition Building came to be, the surrounding Carlton Gardens, looking at how these icons earned their World Heritage status, and briefly looking at the controversy surrounding Melbourne Museum next door. A lot of the historic information I got for today's video was in Environment Australia's 2004 World Heritage nomination. But as always, the sources I used to research the video are in the bio below. If you've been to Melbourne, chances are you've seen this building standing proudly in the middle of Carlton Gardens. At first glance, you can tell there's some history here, but I don't know whether people realise just how historic this building is. Its story begins in the late 19th century, during a global phenomenon known as the International Exhibition Movement. Cities around the world were building grand halls to host international exhibitions, or you might know them as world fairs. These were massive events showcasing industry, technology, art, all sorts of things. Melbourne wanted to step onto the global stage, so in 1877, the city prepared a bid for the International Exhibition Committee. This bid was a pretty bold move. Melbourne was the newest outpost of the Western civilization, and to host an exhibition this far from Europe and America was a statement that Melbourne was a global city worth visiting. The original construction budget of £100,000 was soon more than doubled to £210,000 to allow for a more elaborate design that would wow visitors. This increase had to pass through Parliament. The Legislative Council initially rejected the proposal, arguing the building was too extravagant. But once the bill finally passed in 1878, a design competition was announced. Joseph Reed, the same architect behind the State Library of Victoria, and his associates won that competition against 18 other entries. They used the pseudonym Advance, perhaps to hide the fact they were already some of Melbourne's most distinguished architects at the time. Their design was cruciform in plan and combined a bunch of architectural styles, including Byzantine, Romanesque, and Renaissance styles. It included a permanent hall and a number of temporary annexes and other structures. David Mitchell, father of opera singer Dame Nellie Melba, was chosen to build it. Construction was soon underway and was described as having the pace of an express train. The original design provided around 22,000 square meters of exhibition space, but during construction, organizers realized this wasn't enough. Demand from both local and international manufacturers kept growing. Instead of turning exhibitors away, the site kept expanding. More annexes were added until the exhibition covered around 84,000 square meters, almost 4 times the original plan. Remarkably, construction took less than 18 months. When it was completed in 1879, the exhibition building was the largest in Australia. Its 60-metre dome, inspired by Florence's Duomo, was crowned with a gold leaf cupola, a symbol of Melbourne's ambition and wealth. Just a quick aside here. Some historians argue that Melbourne and Sydney's long rivalry began here. Melbourne planned its exhibition for 1880, but Sydney wanted to be first and rushed to host its own in 1879. Sadly for Sydney, the International Exhibitions Bureau did not recognise their exhibition as its primary focus was agriculture. The 1880 Melbourne International Exhibition was a roaring success, featuring displays from 33 countries and attracting over 1.3 million visitors. Visitors could see things like machinery, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, jewellery, furniture, and wine from around the world. Only 8 years later, the exhibition building hosted its next major event, the Centennial International Exhibition of 1888. For that exhibition, 96 kilometers of cabling illuminated the building. For the first time, an international exhibition was fully lit by electricity and could be viewed at nighttime. This international exhibition was even more successful than the first, with 2 million visits recorded. In 1901, the exhibition building hosted the opening of Australia's first federal parliament. Prime Minister Edmund Barton wanted as many Australians as possible to attend, and so Australia's largest and grandest building was chosen. Just 4 months later, Australia's new national flag was flown here for the first time, following a competition that attracted over 32,000 entries. Throughout these early events, the inside of the building was constantly changing. The original decorative scheme that was used for the 1880 exhibition was painted over for the 1888 exhibition, and then again for the 1901 opening of Parliament. The 1901 decorations were managed by John Ross Anderson, who was also known for designing the interior of the ANZ Gothic Bank on Collins Street. In 1992, when the building was being restored, conservators found 25 layers of paint in some areas. Over the decades, the building continued to adapt to different roles. I'm going to quickfire just a few of them. In 1919, it was used as a temporary hospital for the Spanish flu pandemic. From 1921 to 1925, it housed the first Australian War Museum, which was a predecessor to Canberra's Australian War Memorial. In 1940, 4,000 soldiers stayed here overnight before marching through the city for their deployment in World War II, and later that year it became an Air Force barracks and training facility. For the 1956 Melbourne Olympics, it hosted basketball, wrestling, and fencing. One of its most recent uses was as a mass COVID-19 vaccination centre, where around 400,000 vaccinations were given. I think most visitors to this building have some connection with it. Perhaps you sat your exams here, or you attended the Flower and Garden Show here, or maybe you saw a giant pink blob here. Now, it wouldn't be a Ken's Museum video if I didn't talk about the fact that this building was almost demolished. By the late 1940s, the building had fallen into serious disrepair. It was widely criticised as outdated and oversized. Architect Robin Boyd called it obsolete. Newspapers called it a white elephant. Some politicians argued it should be demolished and replaced with a new Melbourne Town Hall. And in 1948, its demolition was officially proposed. Thankfully, Melbourne City Council narrowly voted against that, though this didn't stop other structures connected to the building being demolished, as you'll see later on. Most ironically, not long after this vote, the exhibition building had a rebound. As Australia's only large indoor exhibition space for a long time, it continued to be the choice for major exhibitions. Possibly the biggest rebound for the exhibition building came in 1980. During the building's centenary celebrations, Princess Alexandra, cousin of Queen Elizabeth II, officially bestowed the building with the royal title. In preparation for the celebrations, the original Royal Ballroom was controversially demolished to make way for a new hall. The public was told this new hall would reflect the design of the Royal Exhibition Building, and I think that promise was taken very literally. As the new structure, later named Centennial Hall, began to take shape, it became clear that it would be an entirely glass building, with a mirror wall reflecting the Royal Exhibition Building. And not everyone was thrilled about that. Joseph Reed didn't just design the exhibition building, he also designed what would become Carlton Gardens, which takes up the entire block surrounded by Victoria, Rathdown, Carlton, and Nicholson Streets. An essential part of Reed's award-winning design for the exhibition building was that it would be situated in a beautiful garden that was suitable for a palace. But before any of this, the government had intentions to reserve the site for public use as early as 1852. While the intention was there, a severe lack of funds meant that the government was unable to complete any proper landscaping or works, so most of the gardens remained undeveloped and unfenced. In the decades that followed, the area was plagued by issues. At one point, it was invaded by goats. At another point, after early planting finally took place, it was vandalized and 600 trees and shrubs were destroyed. In 1870, the government put significant pressure on the city council to build a road through the middle of the Carlton Gardens, connecting Queensbury and Gertrude Streets. Council opposed the road and even took Supreme Court action to prevent it. The biggest turning point for the gardens was when Melbourne decided to host the 1880 International Exhibition. In 1877, Council voted to build the new exhibition building in Carlton Gardens because of the opportunity to rejuvenate the area. It won out against Royal Park and the area that now houses the Arts Centre. The first major change to the gardens was, of course, the construction of the exhibition building, which destroyed nearly 2/3 of the existing landscape. When it was being regenerated, the design was to be garden-esque, featuring exotic trees, pan-tear garden beds, and tree-lined avenues, including that famous plane tree avenue to frame a dramatic view of the exhibition building from Victoria Street. Trees were transported from Mount Macedon, and hundreds of cubic meters of rich black soil were brought in for Broadmeadows. The gardens were also enclosed with an iron fence on a bluestone base. Today, remnants of that bluestone foundation can be seen around the edge of the gardens, and there's a surviving section of railing near the structure close to Carlton Street, which was built as a curator's lodge. Water was also a big feature in the new gardens. Several lakes were built, and several fountains, including the famous exhibition fountain, were installed. This fountain was designed by young German artist Joseph Hirschgürtel. Take a closer look and you'll notice 4 dancing figures around the middle. These were intended to represent the arts, science, commerce, and industry, which were all big features of the 1880 International Exhibition. Higher up, you'll notice depictions of Victoria's native flora and fauna, including platypus, goannas, and ferns. The fountain's flowing water was meant to demonstrate the success of Melbourne's relatively new water system from Yan Yean Reservoir. But ironically, on opening day, the water pressure was so weak that only a small spurt came from the top. Politician and historian William Westgarth gifted the gardens a pink granite drinking fountain, which was positioned in front of the exhibition building's Nicholson Street entrance. Apparently, sometime in the past, the fountain was removed and its base was buried in the Merry Creek, under overburden fill from the Eastern Freeway, and the sculpture went into the possession of stonemasons in Carlton. Thankfully, around 1992, it was rescued, restored, and moved off to the side to make sure it was safe from delivery trucks. Many trees you see in the garden today date back to the 1800s. I think the most defining feature of Carlton Gardens is the grand avenue of plane trees which are aligned with the exhibition building and fountain. I happened to get some footage here over the course of several months, so I'm glad I can show you how amazing this avenue is during different seasons. There are also avenues of elms, which the Victorian Heritage Council notes are some of the only remaining examples left around the world following the devastation caused by Dutch elm disease. In contrast to the European trees is my favourite tree in Carlton Gardens, this enormous sugar gum on the western side of Melbourne Museum's Plaza. It is listed on Melbourne's Exceptional Tree Register because of its outstanding size, habitat value, and strong social significance. Isn't it just amazing? The last trees I wanted to mention are the Moreton Bay figs. These trees hold deep meaning for Aboriginal people, and a cluster towards Gertrude Street has long been a gathering place. Over the years, renowned Aboriginal activists and community leaders have spoken at gatherings held right here. On the 5th of November 2011, Aboriginal men marched from this very location to reclaim respect, and protect their cultural heritage. Today, the south side of the gardens maintains strong integrity with the original 1880s exhibition. They have seen some modification, which I think is pretty expected over such a long period of time, but I think it's incredible that we can see something similar to what visitors saw back then. I guess the trees are just a bit bigger though. I'm going to talk about the Melbourne Museum later on, but it's important to understand that the proposal to build Melbourne Museum in Carlton Gardens, right next door to the exhibition building, was somewhat of a catalyst for how the site got its World Heritage listing. There was such strong pushback about the museum proposal that the opposition leader at the time, John Brumby, and the Melbourne City Council proposed the site be nominated for World Heritage listing. This was rebuffed by the government in power, and construction of the museum was full steam ahead. But once the Labor Party came into power in 1999, they kept their promise and got to work on a World Heritage bid. In 2002, the government formally nominated the Royal Exhibition Building and Carlton Gardens for World Heritage listing, arguing that the building in its original garden setting is the most authentic remaining example of an in situ palace of industry from a significant international exhibition. The nomination included several expert reports who supported the bid, including renowned historian Professor David Cannondine, who said there is nothing like it anywhere else in the world today. UNESCO and the International Council on Monuments and Sites agreed, and in July 2004, the Royal Exhibition Building and Carlton Gardens were officially inscribed on the World Heritage List. Its continued use as an exhibition and event venue was actually a key factor in its listing. I set out to find, what does this listing actually mean? Is it just bragging rights or something else? A World Heritage listing recognizes a place as having outstanding universal value, meaning it is considered important to all of humanity, not just Australia. The listing itself is not necessarily a legal mechanism and doesn't affect ownership rights, but formal recognition does strengthen national efforts to conserve and protect whatever is listed. For example, following this listing, all levels of government collaborated to implement a World Heritage Management Plan, and a designated World Heritage Environs Area, essentially a buffer zone, was established to control development around Carlton Gardens. Another positive outcome was that, in the same year of the listing, Museums Victoria launched a project to restore the Western Forecourt. This was where the German garden once stood in the original 1880 landscape, but it had been buried under bitumen and used as a car park since the 1950s. A World Heritage listing also promotes tourism and community pride, which are important in their own right. The buffer zone was finalised in 2007, but it was much smaller than what was promised during the World Heritage nomination, and parts were classified as areas of lesser sensitivity. The smaller buffer zone opened the door to twin towers at 308 Exhibition Street, near the edge of Carlton Gardens, built on part of a Telstra exchange. This 59-storey high-rise significantly exceeds the intended buffer zone height of 110 metres, being more than double at 231 metres. Many critics argued at the time that the scale of the towers could overwhelm Carlton Gardens, with the chair of the Royal Historical Society of Victoria warning that the protections for the World Heritage Site were there to prevent it from being dwarfed. When the proposal was being considered, the Victorian Government Design Review Panel asked the developers to add extra landscaping to better connect it with the gardens and reinforce Melbourne's identity as a garden city. So, the developers added some landscaping into the bottom portion of the towers. Construction went ahead in 2009, and despite being topped out, to this day it has not been fully finished. That's a whole story in and of itself. What do you think? Do you think they overwhelm the gardens? Or do you think it's not an issue? Now, there's one more element of this precinct that's impossible to ignore. Melbourne Museum. Today, it occupies roughly 1/6 of the Carlton Gardens precinct, sitting directly beside the Royal Exhibition Building. Even though it's now an iconic part of Melbourne, the fact that it was constructed here continues to be a hotly debated issue. In the 1990s, Victoria's museum collections were rapidly outgrowing their home at State Library Victoria. The Victorian government began searching for a spot to put their new and modern museum campus. Extensive planning and preliminary construction started on a new museum in South Bank, but those works were ultimately absorbed into what is now the Melbourne Exhibition Centre. Architecture Australia wrote in a review of the exhibition in 1996, this was to have been Darrell Jackson's Museum of Victoria. A new museum had been constructed in part up to the concrete subframe under the previous Labor government, but it was halted by Jeff Kennett's incoming Liberals. It will now be built north of the old exhibition building in Carlton Gardens and will be designed by Denton Corker Marshall. The resemblance in style between the Exhibition Centre and the Melbourne Museum is because they were done by the same architects, who somewhat ruled Melbourne in the 1990s and 2000s. As I mentioned earlier, when the land opposite the Royal Exhibition Building was chosen for the new museum, it was controversial. I know it's easy to think that it probably replaced something historic in the gardens. I mean, even I thought that before I researched this video. But that spot just north of the Royal Exhibition Building was always a place with changing purposes. Since the international exhibitions of 1880 and 1888, this area has almost been in constant use, with temporary pavilions almost completely filling the site. Over the following century, it housed the Royal Ballroom, an oval, a speedway, an aquarium, and a car park. In order for the museum to go ahead, Centennial Hall, that big mirror structure built in 1980, had to be demolished. And maybe that was a good thing. The museum officially opened on 21 October 2000. The building is a 3-story structure above ground with extensive underground facilities, including a 2-level car park. Inside, it has around 8,000 square meters of public exhibition space and 10,000 square meters dedicated to collections and research. Its architects say the museum's design carefully considers the heritage of the Royal Exhibition Building. It also follows a cruciform plan. Its roofline was required to remain below key heritage height limits, and the cantilevered roof out the back needed to be kept lower than the exhibition building's dome. Many Melburnians strongly opposed building a modern structure within a historic setting. Critics argued the museum disrupted the historic landscape, but supporters countered that the museum regenerated the area. The museum even prompted a lot of debate around the World Heritage listing, as it had an undeniable impact on Carlton Gardens and the Royal Exhibition Building. The government's nomination actually argued that the addition of the museum demonstrated that the site remained active and relevant to contemporary community life, and early visitation seemed to support this. More than 800,000 people visited the Melbourne Museum in its first year alone. While I do think Melbourne Museum has somewhat settled into the space, it does seem to dominate certain views. There's no doubt it's much larger than the Royal Exhibition Building. It's a little bit of a shame that there's not a great garden view of the Royal Exhibition Building from its northern side. The concrete plaza leaves a lot to the imagination, but one cool thing is Colonial Square on the eastern side. These are blocks of granite showing most of the ornamentation from the former Colonial Mutual Life building, one of the grandest buildings ever built in Melbourne. The blocks give you an idea of the scale and the amazing workmanship that went into the stonemasonry. Sadly, this building was demolished in 1960. I think these events for the underground car park, I couldn't actually find any information about them. I hate that they're here, but from another view, I guess you could say this is an incredible feat of engineering, that they were able to excavate the underground car park so close to the exhibition building successfully. Nevertheless, the Royal Exhibition Building has survived and prospered. It is absolutely a work of art. I just wanted to mention that while researching this video, I was genuinely moved by how significant this building is to Melbourne's history and how deeply loved it is now. I don't think I've ever gotten emotional making one of these videos before, so that's a first. I hope that after watching this video and learning the story of the Royal Exhibition Building, you'll have a new appreciation for the incredible contribution it's made to our city. I want to finish with a quote from the World Heritage nomination. Exhibition Building and Carlton Gardens is a unique, magnificent, and outstanding survivor from the great age of great exhibitions. It converts with exceptional force, coherence, power, and vividness the worldwide reach and significance and appeal from this major phase of human history. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've been to the Royal Exhibition Building or Carlton Gardens before, let me know in the comments. If you'd like to support the channel and help me keep making videos like this, there's a link below where you can buy me a coffee. Please also consider giving this video a like or subscribing to my channel to see more videos like this. See you in the next one.